Good afternoon. I'm Monique Holland, Senior Associate Athletics Director with Auburn University. I'm here with Athletic Director U. I'm joined by Ingrid McCree, Director of Athletics at North Carolina Central University, and Kristen Brown, Associate Athletics Director for Sport Administration at the University of Maryland. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic in the world of athletics, sport administration. So ladies, what I'd like to start off with, both of you can answer this question. Tell me about the philosophy of your sport administrator programs. And Ingrid, you can go ahead and start.
Well, I think it's very important that we develop leaders. And so one of the main emphasis for our sports administration program at North Carolina Central is to develop leaders and the future leaders. It is also to provide advocacy for our student athletes and our head coaches. And so they're the first line of protocol after the head coach before me. So it's very important that they are developing the skills that they need to be in the role if they want to in terms of being an AD one day. But it's really to advocate for our student athletes and our head coaches.
Yes, you answered a lot of questions in that one question, so I appreciate that. Pretty detailed. Thank you. Kristen, what about you at Maryland? And if you don't mind starting to tell the group about, or the audience about, coming into Maryland and developing that role, because I think that's critical.
Sure. So when I first arrived at Maryland, we didn't have a sport administrator program. So coming in, we had no rules, no roles, no protocols for what that role really looked like. So over the last 2 years in particular, since I've overseen sport administration, that's been part of my role is to help develop what a sport administrator looks like at the University of Maryland. And for us, I would say that our philosophy, in addition to the things that Ingrid said, really center around two things, and that's servant leadership and providing service to our student athletes in our sport programs. At the end of the day, we're here for our student athletes and to be an advocate and also provide resources and support for our student athletes. So certainly serving them is at the core of what we do. But also I would say at the core of what we do is just consistency from sport to sport. The level of resources might be different from one sport to another, but as long as our administrators are providing consistency in the level of service that they provide, that's at the core of our philosophy.
That's amazing, and that's something we really focus on at Auburn, is just being consistent in our service. And just kind of following through on that, what is your philosophy on access and advocacy for coaches and student athletes, especially when they're on conflicting sides of the situation?
Well, first of all, I stress to all of our coaches and our entire staff consistently that we're here for the student athletes are first, the university second, and then it's the rest of us. And so they have to understand that I'm a very transparent, very open minded leader, and so that I'm always going to listen to the student athletes. Now, are they always right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but they know that I'm going to listen to their concerns. But everyone also knows I'm not going to make any decisions without hearing from all sides and all parties. And so I believe that the student athletes, hopefully they feel that there is advocacy on my part because, again, they are our priority. But also, too, as a former coach, I also know what that feels like. And always having to look over your shoulder to say, okay, as a student, is my athlete going to talk to the AD about something I'm not doing right? So I'm very, very empathetic towards the coach as well to make sure that they understand that I am going to be here to make the best decision for all parties, but knowing that the student athlete is going to be first. And so that access to me is pretty wide open. I share with them during orientation every year that I have an open door policy. I love to see them just stop by. But they also know there is a protocol. So when there are issues, it's a very clear protocol with regards to who, the sport administrator is that first line. So I will always ask, have you spoken with the sport administrator, your sport administrator, to give them that authority and to empower them to try to resolve that issue. And so I hope that I've created an environment, a safe environment for both the student athlete and the coach, and now today's generation and the parent.
Oh, that's a very good point. Kristen, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, and Ingrid hit on a lot of the points that I would say, in that this is, one of the hardest things that I think that we deal with as administrators is dealing with that coach, student athlete, and sometime parent issue. So when the student athlete comes to me, it's, well, have you talked to coach about this? If they have and we're still not on the same page, okay, then maybe it's a matter of bringing both parties in together. Or, it's really just important to do your due diligence and talking to the people that are involved in whatever the specific issue is to ultimately do what's best for the department at the end of the day. And like I said, it's certainly one of the most challenging things that we do, but we have a responsibility to do our due diligence and do the right thing on behalf of the institution.
And we're also, here to help develop our student athletes into, future leaders, productive citizens. And so one of the things that when I'm sharing with them, I will ask, have you talked to your coach? And sometimes the problem is, in their perception, the coach, and that the coach won't speak with them, they won't meet with them. And so I will, challenge them a little bit to say, well, have you tried to put it in writing? Hey, coach, you said something today, it didn't sit very well. I want to express that to you. Can we have a meeting? And so I really try to get them to think outside of the box of how they communicate with their coaches, because sometimes coaches are challenging to talk with and receive feedback. And so it's really about developing them, because they will have to have those uncomfortable conversations with their bosses in the future. So if they're learning that now, how to approach a challenging situation with their head coach, hopefully that'll pan out in the future and they'll be used to doing that.
That's great information. Let me ask you this, ladies. One thing that I dealt with this year that I think I learned a valuable lesson. It really made me be thoughtful. When do you involve a coach when a student athlete comes to you about a complaint about a coach? When do you inform your coach of that, especially when the student athlete doesn't want you to talk about it to them? They're just kind of letting you know. I had a situation where I didn't share it with the coach. After going through it all, I think I should have, but that's tough, because we want to be, a confidential resource to our student athletes, but also make sure our coaches are aware of some of the things or the perceptions of their program. So both of you, tell me, when do you involve a coach from a student athlete's
When a student
complaint?
athlete comes to me, I think the first thing that I stress to them is, depending on what you tell me, it's not confidential. I might have a responsibility to report that to various people given the nature of the issue. And then from there, you kind of take your directive from the information that they give you. I try to keep my coaches in the loop as much as possible. Yes, there are some things that, I have to keep from them. But I try to let them know, hey, a student athlete came to me. I don't divulge who it is. Here are some of the issues that we're talking about. Give them an opportunity to address or to talk about what they might be seeing with that particular issue. And then go from there. But I try to inform the coaches as soon as I can in the process. Sometimes it's not always that simple, but try to keep them in the loop.
I think when you talked about being consistent, that's very important. I think by the time the student gets to me with an issue, I do share with them, okay, I'm going to try to figure out how to help you with this and move through this. So at that point, once it reaches my desk or reaches to me, I have an obligation to share with the coach. And again, maybe not who, but here's some challenges that some students are having in your program, and let's talk about them, because there is that huge fear of retaliation, and people don't like to say that word, but it is. That's just very true in the perception of our student athletes and parents. And so the coach has to know by the time, if it's coming to my desk, if the sport administrators have done as much as they could do, then yes, I'm going to sit and talk with the coach first, and at some point I will bring in both parties.
And I've considered the word retaliation with some of my coaches, and that's what has given me pause with going to them. Because what I tell them sometimes is, if I share it with you and something should change maybe in playing time, unrelated to this situation, it may appear to be retaliation. So sometimes I'm trying to protect the coach as well. But that's just sometimes a hard balance. Ingrid, probably this question is probably best for you. What are some of those, Kristen, you too, since you oversee sport administration, but what are some of those critical skills you think staff members need to have to serve as a sport administrator?
First on my list is empathy skills, and their ability to really try to put themselves in, whether it's the student situation, shoes, or the coach's shoes, the staff member's shoes, because there's always conflicts between coaches and administrative staff. So that is critical for them to have empathy skills before they make a decision, before they, share what should happen. So empathy skills, of course, communication skills, but also really the ability to give good feedback and receive it. I think that is especially when you're dealing with coaches, and I was a coach, so I didn't like feedback, and so that has not changed over the years with our coaches, and it's ironic because they're constantly giving feedback to our student athletes on something, whether it's follow through or whatever, but sometimes they're very challenged with receiving feedback, and so that person has to have that ability to understand how to use their words, how to be tactful, to make sure that the coach is getting the message across.
And I would just add probably two things. Problem solving. Essentially, when something's coming to your plate or to your desk, it's because it couldn't have been handled by others. So certainly an ability to problem solve and find creative solutions to a lot of the issues that come to us in athletics. And then just relationships. You've got to be able to have good relationships, whether that's vertically or horizontally or, with the student athletes. You've got to have good relationships in this role.
Good. So let's transition into a little bit about FaceTime with the AD. What is your philosophy on sport administrators getting FaceTime with you? Or, you talked about protocol a little bit about student athletes, but what about the FaceTime with the AD? Do you prefer them just to go directly to their sport administrator? Like some athletic directors have the philosophy of, I have an open door policy to all my head coaches, and I understand that, but how do you make sure that they go through the proper protocol as well?
So for me, it took a while. This is my 12th year as athletic director. So it took me a while because I was the internal person and task manager. So I was very used to just handling things myself. So it took me a while to wean off of that. And so now I really push people back towards their sport administrator. Now, coaches, I do have an open door with them. We can chit chat, we can have meetings, but there's very few things that I'm going to discuss with them unless it's personnel that the sport administrator is not going to know. So they have access to me. I have access to them. I constantly get up out of my chair and go walk around, so they see me. And I don't ever want to get to the point where I'm not accessible. But the FaceTime comes with individual meetings. It comes in our head coaches meetings, which I have with our sport administrators in one joint meeting. We have head coaches, sport administrator, and quarterly we invite the SAC Council leadership to come into those head coaches meetings. So there's a lot of FaceTime that they get. I get with him.
That's a great idea about adding your SAC to those meetings.
That was the first meeting that we had was very interesting, and they spoke up, and the coaches just sat there like, wow. So it was yeah. That's
good. So you found that to be
very
effective.
Helpful.
Okay, good. Kristen, anything you want to add to that? Because I do have another question for you before we run out of time.
No, go ahead.
As a sport administrator yourself, and what's been the most rewarding experience of that, and maybe share an experience that you're most proud of or something you learned from?
Certainly the best part of the experience as a sport administrator is working with young people. I think that's why we all do what we do in this industry, is to work with young people and help mentor them and grow them and educate them, to be, productive people outside of our university once they go on. A rewarding experience, the one that immediately comes to mind. I had a student athlete my first year who got in some trouble off the field. Part of the terms of his reinstatement to the team was that he had to meet with me monthly. And so he eventually took it upon himself to meet with me weekly. So every Monday he would come in and we'd talk about life, we'd talk about the incident that occurred, what he learned from it, how he was going to use that to help mentor his teammates and those who came behind him. And long story short, as the story goes on, he became a leader amongst his team by his senior year, ended up becoming the National Player of the Year in addition to winning a national championship, which the success story isn't always, that on the field, but certainly his growth off the field has been incredible. And after he graduated, he still comes back. I get texts from him occasionally, just, hey, just checking in, how you doing? He was just back for alumni weekend a couple days ago. So it's just that story in particular, just knowing where he was and the situation that happened off the field and where he is today, I couldn't be more proud of him.
That's an amazing story. I know sometimes, in this case, you got to reap some of the reward of what you did for him immediately, but sometimes we don't get that reward until they're gone and they have those aha moments, when they're like, and they come back and say, hey, Miss Holland, thank you for that. But it may be 10 or 15 years from now. So we have to just really stay true to what our purpose is for being sport administrators. Any final thoughts?
I just think it's very important that our sport administrators are very resourceful in terms of what you said, in terms of problem solving. Very rarely will I assign a first-time head coach with a new sport administrator. So I'm very careful about how I pair up those relationships in terms of the leadership in sports administrators. So I think that's very, very important. If you're an athletic director, knowing your personnel, knowing the personalities, if it's a first-time sport administrator, is always going to be with a seasoned coach, so that there's learning going on both ways. And also, too, just making sure that they are very well-rounded. If they don't know budgeting and travel and purchasing, they need to know at least have some knowledge. I'm real big on cross-training. And so having some knowledge, because they can't help their coach if they don't know how to do basic business operations and budgeting and things like that.
Great. Kristen?
Yeah, I think, being a sport administrator, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You're not an expert per se in any particular area, but you know enough in each of them to be dangerous. But that's the best part about being a sport administrator, is that I'm working with compliance and marketing and media relations. And really, as someone who oversees 7 sports, I feel like I've got a hand in every department and work with so many staff within the department. So that's, the best thing about being an administrator, is that you really span across all levels and all units of the department.
Well, thank you, ladies. There is so much more we could talk about. We didn't even get to personnel, but that's an important part of it. And you mentioned empowering our sport administrators, but I hope everyone out there was able to learn a lot from Kristen and Dr. McCree. Again, Monique Holland with Athletic Director U. Thank you.